Hello, everyone, and welcome to Training Tuesday for Tuesday, September 27th, 2022. I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary. Last week, you saw our coastal carpet python 005 segue from his enclosure into an exercise tent via a station that he was familiar with. This week, you get to see our experienced 6-year-old inland carpet python, Merlin, go directly from his enclosure into the exercise tent. Now, granted, the tent is closer to Merlin's enclosure than I had it set up to 005's, but Merlin still has no problem shifting right into the exercise tent. But of course, I can't make it that easy for him. I want him to get his whole body out of his enclosure, and I want him to twist it or coil it around the stool station that I have inside the tent. And the reason I'm asking him to do that is so that I can get his whole body out of his enclosure. And of course, he has to choose his own route. Even though I thought I was giving him a very simple and direct route to follow with his body around the legs of the stool, he had to decide that he could get to where the target is a better way. And he basically reversed, turned around, and went a different path, but ultimately still ended up at the target, which was where I wanted him to be. And he follows it down, which I find with pythons and other semi-arboreal or arboreal species, that towards the end of the behavior, when you're going to mark the end of the behavior, it really helps to get them in that downward facing ambush position before delivering the reinforcer. It gives them an opportunity to express a natural behavior and anchor the other end of their body onto something. He didn't quite get his whole body on the stool, so I'm just helping him out a little bit. Again, he's experienced, he's 6 years old, he is used to me, and he is used to me touching him. And then I can close up the exercise tent, and now he is safe in there for as long as I need him to be in there, while I not only clean his enclosure, but perhaps train and feed some other snakes and clean other enclosures. So now I've done all that, I've done all I need to, and I'd like him to come out of the exercise tent and go back into his enclosure. This is a very simple position for him to be in with the tent adjacent to his enclosure, but it's a very awkward position for me because I'm having to reach across the span of the exercise tent and try to reach my arm and target into the enclosure to get him to go inside. But that wasn't the roadblock we ran into first. He went directly into the tent from his enclosure, but when I was asking him to support his body on the cloth fabric of the exercise tent to go back in his enclosure, he wasn't wanting to let his weight drop down onto the cloth, and he was very hesitant about it. And so I decided I would help him out. And I went and got a solid object that had grooves in it, and I put it adjacent to the stool stand as a segue between the stand and his enclosure. And you see that once he realizes that's a solid object that he can put his weight on and grip his scales onto it, he doesn't hesitate to follow the target into his enclosure. He just needed to feel a little bit more confident about the path that he was traversing. So this is where the awkward part for me comes in. Usually I stand on the other side of the enclosure and I stick my arm and the target in one side of the enclosure and target him in and through until his head is almost out the opposite door. But I couldn't do that this time because the tent's in the way. I'm trying to get him in the enclosure, as much of his body in the enclosure as I can, and it's just not working very well. So I go ahead and reinforce him for following the target as far into the enclosure as I was able to reach my arm and the target. And you'll see that instead of taking his reinforcer and dropping straight down in his enclosure, he takes his reinforcer and kind of coils back and ends up hanging over the outside of the tent. It's not a problem. I just pick him up and I move him from outside onto one of his perches inside of his enclosure so that he can eat and he is safely contained back inside. So here's that setup that I arranged for him to make it easier for him to get inside. Here's where I set him when I assisted him back inside his enclosure. He likes to hang down and eat like this, so I put his tail over one of his perches. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to always be kind and love your animals.